We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor. We begin with a man who barely exists in the dusty records of history, a phantom from Stratford, who somehow managed to map the labyrinth of the human soul while the world slept. Consider the irony of his childhood, where the smell of cured leather met the stench of a plague-ridden England, molding a mind that would eventually mock the very concept of royal divinity. He stepped into London not as a conqueror, but as a humble observer of our collective insanity, realizing that the entire world is indeed a stage where we all play roles chosen by others. Before him, we were mere archetypes of sin or virtue, but he gave us the burden of inner thought, forcing us to listen to the agonizing whispers of our own fractured, doubting consciences. With a flick of a quill, he invented words for emotions we did not even know we possessed, shackling our tongues to his genius, while he quietly chuckled at our desperate need for self-expression. He wrote tragedies that make us weep for fallen kings, yet he was a shrewd businessman who chased pennies and land, proving that even a god of literature understands the cold comfort of gold. His sonnets are beautiful lies told to lovers and rivals alike, a chaotic mix of desire and disdain that suggests the greatest poet of all time was perhaps just as lost as the rest. Look at the blank spaces in his biography, those missing years that allow us to project our own fantasies onto his void, making him the ultimate mirror for our narcissistic, human, and modern desires. He died and left his second-best bed to his wife, a final, biting joke from a man who knew that physical legacies are nothing compared to the haunting echoes of a well-placed, immortal metaphor.